Welcome back to the Keys podcast, Trust Matters, Lessons in Leadership with me, Ellie Potter. Today's episode is part 2 of our conversation with Stephen Steinhaus, CEO of Solihull Alternative Provision Multi-Academy Trust. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I highly recommend you go back and catch up. In today's episode, we'll be picking up where we left off, talking about the rise in permanent exclusions in schools and how mainstream schools and alternative settings can work together to support pupils. We'll also be discussing the current recruitment crisis and why Stephen believes teaching is like surfing. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a review or like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. When you speak about prevention, if someone's listening now and thinking we can see a pupil, the signs are there that permanent exclusion could be the outcome in the patterns of behaviour and maybe attendance and the way things are going, what are some of those strategies that I guess the teachers and the SLT can put in place to stop that reaching that final point where, like you say, it becomes necessary?
I think one of the key things that we find, and this is, again, it's a difficult ask. It's a difficult ask because very few of us, if any of us, were trained that way when we went into education or became teachers. Is looking at, we talk about it like evasive maneuvers. So this isn't the child is going to be permanently excluded this afternoon. It is, this is the pattern. We can see what's coming. Okay, we can see what's coming. So what are we going to do differently than the diet that everybody else gets? Now that's a tough ask in mainstream because you're already under
resources,
the car.
Yeah.
But that idea is that I've talked about Maverick and now I'm talking about a Black Hawk helicopter. This bad. Americans.
You're getting
the
full
military
America.
industrial complex.
You can't help it. It's
I know. It's terrible. I haven't talked about any 80s films yet. But, Maverick.
That's coming. I was going to say Top Gun. You went a bit.
But that means that the missiles haven't been fired yet, but missile lock. Beep, 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 beep. We know this is coming. So what are our evasive maneuvers? The child's not, the young person isn't going to do that. What are our evasive maneuvers? And that is at a whole school level. That's at a pastoral level, but that's also in the classroom. What am I doing as a teacher, as a TA, as an LSA to disrupt the self-fulfilling prophecy that's coming? And none of us were trained to do that.
Yeah.
You look at a lot of behavior policies, and behavior policies are with the greatest of respect, behavior policies are done so that it's consistent application of penalty. And absolutely you need that. Absolutely you need that, particularly mainstream, given the numbers that they're dealing with and the funding and resource that they are not getting. But where is okay, I've given you a C1. Now, what am I doing in my practice to make sure you don't get to a C2? And then that is the microcosm. The macrocosm is you're at this point in the behavior ladder or policy or protocol or whatnot. What intervention are we putting in to prevent you from going further? But also that then begs the question, what prevention are we able to put in? What intervention are we able to staff and do? Because you have to look at all of this is we are all doing the best that we can with what we have. And if we're not, then we probably aren't going to be in education for very long because that will burn us out faster than anything else. So that's one of the training pieces that we do with our own staff, but also when, because mainstream schools will commission us to consult on behavior policies or exclusion or generally inclusion and things like that, is let's take a look at that, how that's applied, and where is the room for, okay, Harvey, the expectation of behavior is that you don't keep grabbing Jamie next to you or whatever it is. So that's your C1. Now, for a significant proportion of the students, even now, post-pandemic, that will be sufficient.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about those students. And actually, the percentage for whom that isn't sufficient has grown since the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Those totems and social mores and customs and this is the way it's always has been. A lot of our students now don't know the way it's always been or don't see why it should be the way it's always been. Hence the attendance crisis that we have, you know. So therefore, we as educators have to change the way that we're working with that. And that's difficult to do when you're tired.
Yeah. Tired, resource poor.
And you have this looming and I've got 64 books to mark this week and all those other things. So a lot of what we talk about is, okay, then who are the students at risk? Let's prioritize them in terms of how can we tweak that? I'm typical American. I am gluten-free. I choose to be gluten-free, but for health reasons. And this is off. My street credibility has just gone right out the window because I went for brunch.
Brunch?
I went for brunch and I didn't have my barber jacket on.
That's
I didn't have the wax
of you.
going. Yeah, I know. It wasn't a bottomless brunch, but it was brunch. I walked in and I said, this looks great. Have you guys got a gluten-free menu? And the server went, no, but give me a second. And lovely menus. I mean, what they spent on them, And then she grabbed a pencil and she went through and annotated it. And she says, there, you have your own personal gluten-free menu. And increasingly for the kids who are referred to AP, would be referred to AP, or would be permanently excluded, we have to start thinking of what capacity do we have to do that?
Make it work for them, yeah.
Now, we're not going to get it 100% right, but Paul, the Paul Dix adage of when the adults change, the child changes, there is some value in that. We see that happen. But also, it then can quite often uncover what the real, just by a little bit of give, what the real need is. And then you can have real-time discussions. Are we the right provision for this student? Can we meet that need?
Yeah.
Because we've made not just reasonable adjustments, we have in real time adapted our curriculum, our teaching, our pastoral input, our intervention to try and meet those needs. Then you can say, this might work. This is never going to work. This could work. It's kind of working. Which is different than we don't have any other choice. We're going to have to permanently exclude.
Yeah. And when you talk about system change, obviously a lot of that comes from government policies, the money coming through the system. We have a new government. If you had a wish list of the sort of things you'd like to see implemented to make that system change and make it work and everyone work together under that system, what are some of the policies and changes you'd like to see implemented by the government?
I was having this discussion the other day in terms of in my role. Is it a role? Yeah, it is a role. I sit on the secondary council for the NEHT. And the thing that I bang on about there is I come from a family of teachers and educators. My grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse on the plains in Nebraska, in the early-ish 1900s. My dad taught in an urban school for a number of years. My mom taught reception in a number of city and suburban schools. All of that. I love educators. They are my people. And I worry about educators. And the retention crisis is one thing. in this country. That's horrific. And Tez has just put a chart out of the different reasons why they've left the profession. But the recruitment into the profession, not just the recruitment into individual provisions. Who's sitting down with 17, 18, 19-year-olds? Who's sitting down with almost graduates and saying, and running the figures, we're data rich.
Yeah.
These are the kids, because they are. These are the kids that would have gone into teaching 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Let's ask them why they're not.
Yeah.
Because the chickens are coming home to roost in terms of the underfunding of the educational estate. And that's not just asbestos and RAC.
No.
That is, how is education portrayed? You think about, can I get
let's
a little fired
let's
up
go
here?
there. Yeah.
You think about how heads and school leaders, but also schools in general, were dealt with during the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, the rhetoric around schools and
The rhetoric, are we key workers? Well, we are when we need you to be. Information coming out at 6 o'clock on a Friday night.
Yeah, we were like trying to get our policies out.
And then at most words about well-being with that. And I'm speaking at the Schools and Academies show. How rock and roll am I? In November. But I remember the last two that I've been to have been similar to the ones before. But what I hear as I'm walking around is I will hear at least 5 or 6 people talking about, I think I've only got one more year.
Yeah. People are thinking about leaving.
And you're like, oh my gosh. If it's at that level, then again, what is a society and a system? Not only what are we doing, but what are we gonna do? And who are we talking to about how our profession is portrayed, funded, supported, and respected for so many people who might, and I talk about AP like this as well. There are so many people who have the skill set, the pedigree, the background, the experience to work in AP and choose not to. And in AP, that's all you need to know, because if your heart's not in it, it'll eat you alive. It'll eat you alive. But there's that element of education in general. You got to want it to a certain extent, because is it rewarding? Of course it's rewarding, but also sometimes it's like recording a message and putting it on a shuttle and shooting it out into space. You don't know the impact that you've had. Yes, some of us are lucky, some more than others, of former students coming back and saying, "Oh, you've done this and you changed my life," or letters, and that's wonderful. But there is a huge amount of uncertainty and faith that I said I wasn't going to be talking about spirituality, but it's faith. It's a belief in a greater good. And what is it about the profession that now speaks to so many potential educators that says, this isn't for you, kid. This isn't what you want to do.
If you were speaking to those 17, 18-year-olds, what would you tell them about the profession to say, this is a route to go down. These are the things that you should be excited about. These are the things you could learn by becoming a teacher, by becoming a leader.
Well, I talk about surfing a lot. You've seen me standing up. I am not a surfer.
I was going to say, you're quite tall.
Thank you. That's a very generous way of saying it. Tall and incredibly uncoordinated. But I lived in Hawaii for a couple of years and gigged with and hung out with and worked the doors with and taught with, actually, because my first teaching job was in Honolulu.
Wow. I mean, how has this come out at the end of the
now
podcast?
I'm here. But the idea of surfing is so like education. It's in particular like AP. The best surfers in the world spend most of their time sucking salt water and trying not to die.
Yeah.
They're not on the board for hours on end. They're in the water.
Yeah.
And there is that capacity of you get 10 toes going and you're on that board for a set. I remember one of my buddies from the mainland came down and he said it, and I'll never forget the moment, but I hadn't applied it to education until I started working in AP. He said, no matter what anybody ever says, I can say I surfed. He was literally on the board for about a second and a half.
But he did it.
And then did a header
yeah.
into the surf. And so, in our trust and in a lot of good and strong schools and academies and trusts, that bit of I've been on the board, or that bit of oxygen when the waves are crashing down and you surface and get a little bit of air into your lungs and then go, well, here comes another wave back down. That bit of oxygen, that bit of surfing carries you for so long.
Yeah.
I've never known another job like it. I've been a semi-professional musician, and you will get that where you're in the flow state and you're on stage. And quite often I'll come off stage and somebody will say, oh, when you hit that note or that thing you said was really funny. And I'm like, what?
What? I don't remember any of that. Yeah.
And you cringe as you listen back to,
did I really say that?
Did I do that? But then you'll see everybody after the gig, and for a day, maybe 2, maybe 3, in the era of social media, you'll get texts and WhatsApp messages and and posts and whatever, and then it's gone. But that success in education of I've helped a child regulate. I've helped a child, complete this piece of work.
Mm.
I've helped a child figure out what a fraction was. Man, that can drive you for weeks, months, And I guess if we're framing the recruitment crisis in the same breath as we're talking about the change in our students is also going to be the change in our future educators.
In the world as well.
And the change in the world. So, one of my coming from a background as a drama and English teacher who also taught a bit of PE and whatever, I've always been very relational. And, and being American in England, you kind of get away with stuff and it's easier to make relationships. Yeah. But also, I used to be 8.5 stone heavier. So when you're 6'4" and 340 odd pounds, some kids are like, I ain't being relational with him,
Yeah.
But I went into a job and I was in charge of behavior and inclusion and progress. And Ellie, it took me 9 months. 9 months before I could say, I'm surfing.
That's a long time under the water.
Oh, yes. And what has changed in this world is very few people these days are willing to wait that long.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that the profession, the powers that be, those who are on the front line in terms of training, teacher training, recruitment, education courses, all of that, that's something we have to account for, is those social mores and customs and milestones and totems that our young people in schools are missing, enhanced transition from year 6 to year 7, harvest fest, all those things. Well, that's what our workforce is dealing with as well. So, the expectation of school leaders that the next generation of school leaders will work the way they worked. It's not the case.
No.
It's not the case. It's an opportunity, though. That Kingsman analogy is all right. So what are we going to do about it? Rather than, oh gosh, it's terrible.
Panic. Yeah. Yeah.
So it is, and I envy you doing this season, because what a time to be doing a podcast about, well, particularly post-general election, about MATs and about school leadership, because it is all
time to change
up
it. Yeah.
for negotiation. And negotiation can breed innovation as opposed to stasis. And the best trusts are doing that, are saying, okay, here we need to work in a different way.
Yeah.
We need to work. And I'm very, very clear as the front man
The lead singer for the trust.
our trust. Yeah, I don't know about that. As the figurehead or whatnot, is that it's not that we're not doing well, but it is incumbent upon us to do better. And by that, I mean continuous improvement, interrogating and investigating at all levels. How can we add value? It is that marginal gains. How can we be more equitable? How can we be more impactful? How can we be more sustainable on a student by student level, on a provision by provision level, and whether that be in terms of estates or humanities? If we're not, I'm not a huge fan of my American football coach when I was at university. And I highly doubt anybody who is a huge fan would hear this podcast.
He'd be listening. He might be.
It was probably quite obvious that I wasn't a fan. But there is one thing he used to say, which is so twee, but he used to say, you're either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. And none of us, and the MAT agenda has got to be, we all got to be green and growing every single day in terms of what's the best for our students, what's the best for our staff, because those elements do have a knock-on effect onto society.
Yeah.
And the local community, but wider than the local community. And that's, so going back to an earlier question, is when I'm talking to somebody who might want to work with us, or if I'm talking to somebody who's considering a career in education, is you can change the future. You may not know. I didn't say you're going to know you changed it, but you can change the future, because one child, that's all there. You've changed the future.
We like to finish the podcast
Yes.
with 4 quick fire questions. So the first one is, and I think you might have touched on this already, but what do you think is the single biggest issue impacting the sector right now?
Well, I'm going to say finance.
Yeah.
But the issue that finance is not addressing is that shift in need.
Second question, what motivates you on your difficult days?
I and we have to remember that we are only as good as our weakest link, but also no matter how hard we're working, doesn't mean we can work harder, particularly in AP, particularly in our trust. There is a young person who needs us. And he doesn't need us to be, or she doesn't need us to be stressed and angry and exhausted. So you got to get up off the mat and go, because who else do they have? For some of our students, who else do they have? You have chosen to be that person, or to be part of that sort of team. So suck it up and let's go and do some good. And I have that self-talk that I will have with myself. I can't believe I'm putting on the monkey suit to go and talk about funding and spreadsheets with this politician or this civil servant. And I've had real problems with that, in that I'm a teacher. I'm not a CEO. You're damn right I'm a CEO, because that's what these students need. They don't need me to be teaching them about Brecht. We've got somebody else who could do it far better than I can. You got to remember who you are and why you do what you do. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and go do it.
Third question, what has been your proudest achievement in your career so far?
I would say it takes some beating that in a country where on average 1 in 2 students who come to a trust like ours and provisions like ours will be NEET within 3 months, that we have consistently had no NEETs within our leavers.
Wow.
Because again, the buy one, get one free, the doubling and tripling effect of that and the impact of that is huge. That takes some beating. I'm sure there's others.
That is huge.
That takes some beating.
For sure.
Yeah. And I say it's the proudest achievement in my, man, that's not down to me. So in some ways, it's the team is my proudest achievement, because that's not down to me. My view is when it all goes to hell, it's on me. When it goes well, it's because of you.
Wow, that's really powerful. And final question, what are you most looking forward to this academic year?
God, I sound like a geek and a half, but curriculum innovation. Where are we going now?
Yeah.
You know, what is possible? And because I'm the CEO, I won't be driving that. So I guess I'm looking forward to that is we've got the expertise in our trust. It doesn't need me to say, oh, what if we did that? That's not my role anymore. My job is to put those folks in the best possible position to have those conversations and to engage at that level and to innovate. So I'm most looking forward to being in a position to facilitate innovation rather than to be the innovator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
And that's a shift. That's a huge shift in terms of how I position myself mentally, philosophically, moving forward. But that's really exciting to see what's possible by putting the right people in the right places, as opposed to, oh, let's see what I can come up with, which by default is how a lot of us work. So yeah, that's really exciting. Really exciting.
Wow, amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
I feel like I'm sorry I talk so much.
No, that's the whole point of a podcast. You did exactly what you're meant to do by coming on. But yeah, thank you so much. I feel like there's so many takeaways for our listeners, and I'm really looking forward to everyone listening to this.
Excellent. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening, and thank you very much to Stephen for joining us today. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, make sure you go back and catch up on Stephen's incredible journey into leadership and the foundation of the Mat's unique approach. To find out more about how the Key can support your trust, please visit thekeysupport.com/trust. For more information about Stephen, links to relevant resources and information on how to subscribe to the Trust Matters monthly newsletter, head to the description below. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like and subscribe or leave us a review.